and who loves his children. And so you know what?
So they forget.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It counts with good faith. And when you're
So right.
yeah.
You are such a good
So tonight I will find you and we'll sit here together.
No, tonight.
Oh, you're going to the thing? Oh, right, and I'll take your paper.
Yes.
I will take your paper. Yeah. No, I know you paid for it. You'll be on your cruise. Excuse me.
Yeah, I'm going to be cruising. All right.
Yeah, I'm taking it. And you know what? No, because I'm meeting a girlfriend from So, you know,
I'm going to study the chocolate center.
Where are you going?
My girlfriend and I will be studying together. Julie, August. Yeah, it's really fun. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to start in about 2 minutes. I'm sorry that the food came in late. A number of people online agreed that they don't mind standing online and us starting the session, so I'm just going to give it another minute or two, and we'll get started. Looking forward.
Just Zoe's. I'm meeting two of my girls. Zoe's, it's across from Tampa. Did you like it? Yeah. You have to cram everything into my day. No, how is that? No. When did it open? I think mine. I didn't even know it opened.
Maybe I should have
Friday night. Friday's my husband's birthday, so we're gonna go to Ruth Chris. Ruth Chris. Yeah. No, I know it's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to get started. Again, I appreciate everyone who agreed to let us get started, even though they're waiting online. Thank you. One of the lessons I learned early on in doing lunch and learns is you do not get between the Jewish people and food. Okay, so now that we've got that covered, just trying to find the right spot where I get less. Okay, this seems good. So this guy is looking in the mirror one day, and he's starting to feel very old. And he tells his wife, "I can't stand what I see in the mirror. I've got this big beer belly. My head is balding, and I see, I've even got this stoop." His wife says, "Well, think of it this way, at least your eyesight is perfect." So the story we're going to start with today and discuss is a story that begins with someone sort of looking in the mirror. And as we did in the past weeks, I'll tell the story, and I'll invite everyone to take a look at the text that it originates from, and we'll discuss it. Again, with the idea of keeping in mind that stories, perhaps more so than anything else, form culture, convey the values, reflect the thinking of a culture. So here's a story that goes back. This may be one of the oldest stories we've seen so far. It goes back to before the story of the Maccabees. And it's a story that's told in the first person. It's told by a man who is known as Simon the Righteous. In the Talmud, he is identified as being a contemporary of Alexander the Great. And there are stories in the Talmud where actually he had some dialogues with Alexander the Great. He was the high priest in Israel. So he was the leader, and he tells the following story. The story is just a brief background. there is a mitzvah in the Torah, which is an unusual mitzvah, and it's the mitzvah of the Nazir. Anyone ever heard of that term? The Nazir. Not Nazareth, right? That's a different religion, right? The Nazir. The Nazir, literally, Nazir means to separate oneself. And the Nazir is someone who takes on a specific vow. And his vow is that he's separating himself or herself from two specific things. One is drinking wine. I will not drink wine. And I will not groom my hair, specifically cutting my hair. And generally, if someone accepts this vow, it's assumed to be for a 30-day period, unless indicated otherwise. So if someone says, I take upon myself to be a Nazir, they use that term, that's 30 days of no hair cutting and no wine drinking. Okay? Can you live with that? Right? You know, this mother who tells her friend, she says, you know, I never drink. And why not? I mean, some wine is good once in a while. She says, listen, in front of the kids, I don't think it's appropriate that I should be drinking. And if the kids aren't there, who needs to drink? Right? So, but that's what a Nazir is. Someone who does not drink. And now there's one other piece to it that's important for our story, is that after 30 days, the hair does get cut. And it gets cut off entirely. Clean shaven, the bald head. So it's pretty extreme. You grow your hair and then you cut it all off. Now why someone would do that is its own story. And in general, the rabbis discouraged people from taking on this type of obligation. But there was one man who very famously was a Nazir. And he was a Nazir actually for his entire life. A biblical figure. You've seen pictures of him in artist renditions. He always has very long hair. Always. Want to take a shot at it? Samson, exactly. Samson and Delilah. Samson was born at his birth. He was considered a Nazir already, based on an angel coming and saying and a prophecy. And he never cut his hair. It was Delilah who cut his hair. Okay. So the rabbis discouraged it. And by the way, the main reason, and maybe this is something we'll discuss a bit, that it's discouraged is because in Judaism, pleasure is not discouraged. What is encouraged is moderation when it comes to pleasure, but in general, it's viewed as a positive thing for a person to enjoy themselves. The rabbis make a statement, the rabbis say, anyone who had an opportunity to enjoy a good food or something and chooses not to, needs to give account for it. You need to have a good reason why you didn't do it. Now, there may be a good reason, but you need to have a good reason. The default position should be a person should enjoy themselves. And it's a whole separate conversation why that's important. Just very short, people who don't enjoy themselves have a harder time spreading their joy to other people as well. But that's a separate discussion. It's complicated. But let's now get to the story that Simon the Righteous, the high priest, says. And he says, one day there was a Nazir who arrived at the temple. He was a young man, and he came from southern Israel. He was a very good-looking man. Beautiful hair, beautiful appearance. And he says, I said to him, I said, why did you decide to destroy your hair? Because once you become a Nazir, that means at the end of that period, you cut off all your hair. You have beautiful hair. Why did you decide to do that? And at this point, I want you to start thinking if the story sounds familiar from other cultures. There's some connection. And if it does sound familiar, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, and I'll interrupt mid-story. I want to know what connection you see. And he said as follows. He said, I was a shepherd of for my father. And once when I went to draw water from the well, I saw my reflection in the water. And I gazed on my reflection. He says, and what happened is this, what's called in Jewish parlance, the Yetzer Hara, which is used basically to say any drive, any emotion, any inner force that takes you to bad places. So it could be anger, jealousy, hubris, it could be anything along those lines. So he says that my evil inclination rushed upon me and sought to drive me from the world. Does that sound familiar? Does it have any echoes of another story? Greek mythology?
Pandora.
Sorry?
Pandora's box.
Okay, good.
Narcissus.
Narcissus, right? Anyone familiar with the Narcissus story? right? How does it go? How does that one end? Because we're going to see this one has a very different ending.
They're called tragic for a reason.
Very good. What? He's enamored with his reflection. He dies. What happens? How does that happen? He's driven to a point where
He wants to be in the water.
he's in love with his appearance. That's where the term narcissism comes from, right? What is narcissism? When a person is so completely self-absorbed, this is not the clinical definition, right? But when a person is so self-absorbed that everything is about them, and they live their lives defending this imaginary greatness, which is constantly under attack because no person is really that great, right? So it's a very miserable life, both for the person who suffers from narcissism and also for the people in their environment. It's impossible to live with a narcissist. So it comes from this story, someone who sees his reflection and is enamored by it. Okay, so here's how this story goes. This is the Jewish story of Narcissus, if you will. So once he senses this, he addresses his, like the Yetzer Hara. He addresses those inner thoughts that are leading him to a negative place. And he calls it a wicked one. He calls it out. You're no good. The sentiment, these thoughts that are emerging inside myself, he calls them wicked. He says, and listen to this, why do you pride yourself in a world that is not yours, with one who is destined to become worms and dust? Okay, so give that some thought. I swear I will shave you off from heaven. And that's why he became a Nazir. He took on this vow in order to combat what he was feeling inside himself when he saw his beautiful reflection in the water. So he decided he's going to take it down a few notches, take away some of those good looks, take away that hair as a response. And then Simon the righteous offers his own thoughts. He says, I immediately arose and kissed his head, saying, my son, may there be many Nazirites like you in Israel. Meaning, this is a good reason to be a Nazir. In general, the rabbis discourage people to be a Nazir, but this is a good reason. He celebrated this person and the choice that they made. Okay. So, some reactions, some thoughts, and again, I encourage you to think of this as a story that was told at the bedside, that mothers told their children, or was discussed at a Shabbat table, or were just said when people got together and they sang songs and had a story in between. These were stories that were part of Jewish culture. So let's think of it on a sort of a gut level, like what does this convey, what are the lessons, and then let's also try to think of it on a deeper level. Are there deeper lessons and messages? So let's start with the gut level. What message does this tell a child or even an adult? But what is the basic message, lesson from the story as it reflects Jewish thinking and Jewish values? Yeah.
I think it's to be vigilant of our behavior and our thoughts, and to notice who is really speaking and from whom are we really acting and speaking from.
Excellent, excellent. That's something I would expect in about 20 minutes. It's very deep. Very good. Very good. I'm going to repeat it. I'm going to repeat it. It's excellent. If we just hear this, it's worth having come for this whole session. The idea that I'm going to elaborate a bit, because I got to get paid for something, right? So the idea that we as people, the choices that we ultimately make are a reflection and a function of inner emotions that emerge before the decision and that drive the decision. And sometimes it's years in the making that we build up a certain feeling and it finally gets expressed in a certain way. We could be jealous about someone slowly, incrementally, getting more and more jealous, and finally 3 years later we push them off the cliff, God forbid, you know? I don't mean literally, but I'm saying we can do something that's very hurtful to someone. The idea of monitoring, of recognizing the reality, that the things that creep up inside us that ultimately will drive us, or could drive us, and being vigilant, monitoring it, and combating it at that level, that lesson is one of the most profound lessons of the human nature and the human experience. And does this story not evoke that in a child's mind and in an adult's mind? That you can have that conversation, you can be aware of what's happening inside you, reflect upon it, understand where it's taking you, and then speak back to it or react in a way that minimizes negative thoughts, negative feelings, and negative drives. Who here hears that in this story? Who here hears that in this story? Okay, good. Anything else? Anything else in the story that would reflect values, wisdom, lessons, Jewish thought? Okay, next story. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
It reminds me also a little bit about putting, I forget the Hebrew word, but putting boundaries around like Shabbat, like.
Get there? Get there.
Okay. Because you need boundaries to keep yourself on track, and his boundary was to cut off his hair and become a Nazir.
Okay, very good. I mentioned in passing the idea of moderation when it comes to pleasure. It's true that other things true. Is that a person would often be wise to make boundaries in their life, because even a good thing, there's such a thing as too much, right? And especially things that aren't necessarily good, but are part of our life, and maybe we need them for some things. And by the way, jealousy is, like I mentioned before, is something that might have its place if it's used in a way that inspires you to not put the other person down and feel better than that person and bother you that they have something good. But if it's something you said, look, so-and-so has something good, why can't I have it? Why don't I try myself to achieve it, and you're inspired to something greater? That could be a positive thing too, but everything needs to have a boundary. So the idea of approaching life with saying, what are my boundaries? That's a very healthy message. Very good. Story about this guy who he's promoted to officer in the Army, and he now has his office, and he is just so proud of himself. I mean, he is so proud. He's on top of the world. And he sits down at his desk, and he's trying to get his bearings, and he hears a knock on the door, and it's one of the soldiers coming to speak to him, and quickly picks up the phone handset and says, "Come in." And as soon as the soldier walks in, he starts having this conversation, saying, "Yes, Mr. President, yeah, I understand that you would value my opinion on this, and I'd be very glad to give it to you, but now I'm busy, I've got things to do. Yes, Mr. President, sure, I'll pencil you in for..." And then he hangs up, and he turns to the soldier and says, "Yes, who are you? What can I do for you?" He says, "Oh, I'm in the Army, I'm with the phone service here. I can't install your line." The idea of people sometimes feeling the need to make themselves bigger than they are. Is that something that, because one of the things that's a bit mysterious in the story, and again, I invite you to look at the text, it's a bit cryptic. The way he quotes what he says, it says that it says that his evil desires rushed upon him and sought to drive him from the world. What does that mean? It's a bit vague. The evil desires sought to drive him from the world. But what does it mean to drive him from the world? In what way? In what way would these evil desires, this Yetzer Hara, how would it drive him from the world? And then he has a specific response to it. So let's first, what might it be that would drive him from the world? Again, he's seeing his very handsome appearance in the mirror, in the reflection of the water. What is it that could be driving him from the world? What's going on inside him? If we tried to get into his mind and heart at the moment, what would we see? Any thoughts? Yeah.
Would it be very self-centered, repressed?
Okay. Self-centered. What was the next thing you said? Impressed?
Impressed with
Very impressed with himself?
and so doesn't relate well with others because he's so important.
Okay. He's becoming very important in his mind. Right? He's talking to the president. Yeah.
Maybe feeling being above people is separating him from the people.
Very good, very good. Feeling above people, separating himself from others. Anyone want to add something to this? I just want to make sure we sort of flesh out the concept in a way that we can relate to it. I want to hear from some people how we relate to this, what's going on here. And also keep in mind his response. His response is, why do you pride yourself right, in a world that isn't yours? And from one who is not going to be here, it's going to become worms and dust. What's going on inside him, and what is his response? And I submit to you, by the way, that this may be the most powerful insight that life has to offer. And I submit to you that it might be, I say it might be, I speak for myself, I believe it is, and therefore I'm thinking it might be for others as well. So if we can pinpoint what's going on inside his mind, and we don't have many clues, but it's that it's the driving from the world, and his response is, why do you pride yourself in a world that isn't yours? Those words are very, very powerful. And one who is destined to be worms and dust. What's going on in his mind and how's he addressing it? This is, I mean, if anyone does any therapy, and I don't mean professional, but when people have issues, very often at the root of many of the stresses in life, the confusion, and mistakes people make based on how they feel, emanates from this very, very issue. This is at the heart of so much. Any thoughts? I know I'm a bit demanding because the clues here are limited, but I just believe this exercise is so valuable. Just pushing for a little more thought on that. Yeah. Just so you know, I'm trying to give people some time.
Oh, okay. We're too active.
Okay. So it's all yours now. Start with you. Yeah.
Well, I see it as looking externally rather than internally.